Thank you, Thierry, for sitting down with us. We are heading towards the end of the conference. What are the main takeaways you will take home with you?
Well, there are many, but it depends on the viewpoint. You know, from the viewpoint of the WPC as a whole, I would say that the climate of this conference was extremely good. We had, as always, perhaps even better in a way, a variety of people from different countries, but also holding the different approaches to various questions. They disagreed on many points, but all that in a friendly way, in a positive way, and with respect, a mutual respect, that is people listening to one another and trying to take the best of what the other people were saying. I insist on that because this kind of approach is crucial not only for the future of the WPC, but for the future of the world, you know, because many wars, many tragic situations occur as a consequence of the absence of such a mutual respect, of such a mutual understanding. So I am satisfied because this figure of tolerance, mutual respect, etc., is the DNA of the World Policy Conference. So in that sense, that's very good news. So as you say, this year, 2024, was extremely rich in geopolitical and geoeconomic
What can we
events.
expect from 2025?
I think one should always think of the short term and the longer term simultaneously. You know, you cannot separate the short term and the long term. Today, we could have more wars, more tragedy, almost everywhere. If you take the case of the Ukraine-Russian war, it could, I wouldn't say end, but we could have a kind of ceasefire that could be the beginning of the end. And many people are speculating on that, in particular because of the election of Trump.
Are expecting it.
But I say speculating on that, perhaps expecting too. But it could also develop in very different situations. You know, you could have a failure of the expectations. The expectations you are alluding to are based on the idea that Mr. Trump will come and say, well, in the next 24 hours, I will solve the problem. Of course, nobody can take that seriously, not even Mr. Trump himself. I think he's too intelligent to think it seriously. But we could have the beginning of a process. But, you know, if the mood of Trump and of Putin, and to some lesser extent, I would say, Zelensky, do not match together, we could still very well have an escalation process. So I would be very cautious about making specific predictions. But if we consider the balance of forces, the fact that the two main actors of this tragedy are tired, that they have big major problems ahead of themselves, we could expect that there would be some kind of beginning of a peace process. But even if such is the case, we should not expect the peace itself come anytime soon. It will be a long-term process. You can have a ceasefire, but what is a ceasefire? A ceasefire is literally cease of fire, you know. But then, on which basis? I think that there will be some kind of territory division. You know, one important politician of Germany made the point that there is no territorial problem in Ukraine. Yes, of course, there is a territorial problem. You know, the most,
during one of the sessions he made that statement.
And the most likely hypothesis is that there will be some kind of partition of the Ukraine territory as it was in the 1991 borders. But you see, to illustrate the complexity of such an issue, if there is a territorial division, it will not be recognized by most other countries. The United States, the Europeans are very unlikely to recognize diplomatically or legally such a partition. It will be de facto partition. So it means that when we meet next year and the year after, we will certainly be continuing to discuss the issue. But it is true that possibly, and hopefully, I would add, the war itself will have stopped. But again, reconciliation, normalization, etc., will take much more time. And beyond the short to medium term, you have to have a vision of how do we look at Russia, for instance, in the world, and the Russian-European relations in the longer term. To illustrate this point, think about Russia and China. Is it in the interest of the Russians to remain forever junior partners of China? Definitely not. No. So there will have to be some kind of reconciliation. But reconciliation between Russia and the West does not necessarily mean that that Russia will become a nice democratic state. So these are the kind of issues that we are likely to have to discuss at the WPC and elsewhere in many years ahead.
Maybe a word for the conclusion, because that was already quite of a conclusion, but that geopolitics is about daily life. A lot of different topics are linked to geopolitics. We've discussed healthcare, energy, many different kind of topics. Why is that important?
Well, you see, geopolitics is on the move all the more as you say in your question. We have in the background huge economic and sociological or societal problems. All these things are intertwined, or climate change, health problem. In one of the last sessions focused on health issues, global health issues, and I think the conclusion was clearly that because of neglect, of general neglect of anticipation and lack of will of acting together, that's a problem of governance. As a consequence of all this, there is a real likelihood of a new pandemics in the next 4 to 5 years.
So we should prepare.
That could be at least as dramatic as the COVID-19 one, which de facto everybody has forgotten today. So we have many problems ahead of us. Now, to say things briefly, I will repeat what I said myself in my opening speech of the conference, namely that we have already entered the second Cold War. The first Cold War was related to the United States and the Soviet Union, with of course the Europeans in between. Now the core of this second Cold War is US and China, with also the others being caught in between, with Russia as a secondary actor, actually not a primary actor. But the second Cold War has already started. In fact, if you look at all this atmosphere of wars everywhere, and therefore the big question is, how do we manage this second Cold War in order to, one, avoid it generating into a third World War? I'm not saying that it is going to happen. I am saying
But
that there
can
is a risk. Therefore, the question is how to prevent this, you know. So that's one aspect. And the second, like in the first Cold War, we have to see how to manage the situation in order to progressively organize some kind of détente process, to use the French term actually that was used at the end of the Cold War. Now, you know, if I take a global look on the world, this edition of the World Policy Conference, I am pleased also to add that there were also some optimism.
Yeah.
No, and especially on the second and the third day, in the sense that you know, when you have people of goodwill, who are people who have a certain competence in the matters they are talking about, but at the same time, if they have a certain goodwill, and if they are prepared, as I said earlier, to talk among others in a positive way, there is some light ahead too. And talking about both the Ukraine war and the Middle East situation, which is quite complicated, there are some possibilities of moving towards a better situation, and perhaps, hopefully, you know, a kind of order, regional or global order that could be structurally stable for a number of years ahead. So we should not be pessimistic in the sense that making somber predictions about the future. But we have to be aware that very nasty things could happen.
Let's keep the discussion open.
Absolutely.
See you next year.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Next year and the many years after.
Perfect.
Thank you.